Hi, I'm Augustin.
And I'm Natalie.
We're 15.
Twins, actually.
And we're grade 10 high school students in Sudbury, Ontario.
We've been reading a lot about the Liberal government's plan to legalize marijuana.
So we thought we'd make this video to explain a little more about it.
First, some history.
Marijuana wasn't always called marijuana. It was once known simply as cannabis.
Cannabis has been used as a medicine and a recreational drug for thousands of years. It has been identified in ancient ceramic pots dating back to 10,000 years ago. Some experts believe that cannabis may have been one of the first plants to be cultivated by humans.
But the Chinese are regarded as the first to use cannabis for its medicinal properties 6,000 years ago.
It was traded from China to India, then taken by Arabian traders into the Middle East. Cannabis was used by ancient Egyptians for treating glaucoma and inflammation.
The Arabs then brought cannabis into southern Spain in the 8th century. There, it became a widespread medicine used for many different ailments. And cannabis as hemp was fantastic for ropes on ships, so its use in the Spanish Armada exploded.
Spanish explorers eventually took cannabis across the Atlantic to South America, where it grew abundantly.
From there, it worked its way into Mexico and into America, where it was just as popular. Even George Washington and Thomas Jefferson grew hemp.
Hemp is extremely useful and is used not just for rope, but also for paper and clothing. The seeds are a valuable source of protein.
By the end of the 19th century, cannabis was commonplace and everywhere. Plantation owners grew it, slaves smoked it, and doctors prescribed it. Everyone used it in cough syrups, headache remedies, and potions for upset stomachs.
Then, for some very dodgy racist and political reasons, politicians in the USA decided to clamp down on it. They passed the Pure Food and Drugs Act, which regulated it and made it hard to buy.
That's when they stopped calling it cannabis and started calling it by the slang word marijuana. So lots of people had no idea what the law referred to. Soon after that, many states started banning it. Marijuana was being shunned.
Why was this? There are a lot of theories, but we now believe it was because cannabis was associated with immigrants, jazz music, and black culture. In the 1930s, predominantly white American society stigmatized and denounced these things as dangerous and evil.
Then, in the 1970s, came President Richard Nixon and his infamous war on drugs. He declared that America's #1 enemy was drugs, and that the hippies were now the enemies of the state because they used marijuana.
Marijuana was portrayed as an evil destroyer of youth, a dangerous, highly addictive substance with no benefits. All research on the benefits of marijuana stopped.
Things finally started to change with the new millennium. Canada led the charge, making marijuana available to people with certain medical conditions in 2001.
Now, Canadians are reconsidering marijuana or cannabis once again as a recreational drug. Legislation to make it legal may begin as early as next spring. With that, Canada can usher in a new era for marijuana. But there are still lots of questions to be answered.
On that note, let's go over to our expert scientists, Mr. A and Miss N. Fun fact, did you know that 80,000 acres of hemp are currently being grown in Canada?
Fascinating, isn't it? And yet, I bet that most of you didn't know that hemp and marijuana are the same plant.
Honestly, I don't blame you. It's not exactly a common topic of conversation. So, hemp is pretty similar to marijuana, but not quite.
Both plants are from the genus Cannabis, but while marijuana has a lot of psychoactive components, hemp has been bred to have very little.
It also has been bred to be a much tougher and stringier plant, which is why it is so often used for rope, fabrics, and even clothing.
Marijuana or cannabis is used recreationally or as a medicine because of its higher concentration of these psychoactive components.
Now, what are these psychoactive components we keep talking about? Well, these are the things that make marijuana so unique and special.
There are two main chemicals in marijuana, THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, and CBD, or cannabidiol. These are called cannabinoids. There are a lot of other cannabinoids, up to about 70 of them, but in much smaller quantities.
The amounts of THC, CBD, and other cannabinoids can be bred to be at very different levels in different marijuana strains. There are also these things called terpenes. The terpenes give different strains of marijuana their unique smells and tastes, like pine, coriander, and grapefruit.
And skunk, maybe?
You may have heard about two marijuana strains, sativa and indica. There's a lot of debate raging on right now whether these are different subspecies of marijuana or if they're in reality the same plant. But nowadays, it really doesn't matter. There's been so much crossbreeding that it's not possible to tell them apart.
Okay, back to THC.
THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol, is psychoactive. That is, THC makes the user feel euphoric or high, buzzed, or even stoned. In contrast, CBD, cannabidiol, has no psychoactive effects, so using a plant with lots of THC can make you high, but using a plant with lots of CBD and very little THC, not high.
So why is THC psychoactive?
It's simple. Our brains have little receptors, like little locks, sitting on the nerve cells. THC acts like a tiny key that opens the lock and gets those cells working away. Nerve cells firing in certain parts of the brain can give you that buzzed feeling.
Unfortunately, THC does other stuff in your brain that can be less than pleasant. It can cause dizziness, problems concentrating, loss of coordination, memory problems, anxiety, and paranoia.
And there are THC receptors in the brain that tell the heart to beat faster and the blood pressure to shoot up. And that's never good.
How about the long-term effects?
Well, there hasn't been a ton of research into long-term effects of marijuana in adolescents. There isn't even that much research into marijuana in adults. So thank you, President Nixon. But we do have some data.
We know that one of marijuana's most significant effects is on the brain.
Neural pruning may sound like something you do to a shrubbery, but it isn't. During adolescence, your brain constantly matures and changes until you're in your early 20s. But your brain only has a limited amount of space for nerve cell connections. It has to get rid of some connections by pruning them away so that new ones can grow. This is neural pruning.
In adolescents that use marijuana, however, neural pruning doesn't happen quite right. This can lead to problems in concentration, decision-making, and memory.
In this modern 21st century, your brain is your key to a good education and a good job. Why would you risk damaging it?
Then, there's the issue of schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia is a really, really bad mental illness.
Marijuana has been linked to schizophrenia, but does marijuana cause schizophrenia?
The unfortunate answer is we don't know. There certainly is a link between early marijuana users and schizophrenia, but lots of other factors can come into play, like whether anyone else in the family has schizophrenia. The problem is we don't really know what factors are important yet. The disease of schizophrenia is a life-altering and terribly debilitating mental illness. If you have relatives with schizophrenia, you know what I mean. But even if you don't, would you want to take that chance?
Hopefully, with further research, we'll find out whether there is truly a link. But now, better to be safe.
Now, what about marijuana's effects on the lungs?
I don't think any teenager would argue that cigarettes are bad for you. We've been taught about this since JK, and it's clear from statistics that cigarette smoking is steadily decreasing amongst teens.
But smoking marijuana is as harmful to your lungs as smoking cigarettes. There are the same nasty carcinogens and tars in marijuana smoke that are found in tobacco smoke. And it's pretty clear that smoking marijuana increases the risk of bronchitis, wheezing, and a better chance to get colds or flus.
Now, marijuana does have many medical uses.
It's an effective painkiller.
It can help with people with seizure disorders.
It can reduce nausea in patients getting chemotherapy for cancer.
It can help regulate weight and appetite in patients with AIDS.
And it can help with muscle spasms in patients suffering from an awful brain disease called multiple sclerosis.
Doctors can prescribe marijuana for their patients, but they don't really want their patients to smoke anything. Think about it. How often do doctors give a medicine to a patient, then ask them to light it on fire and breathe in the smoke?
So how do doctors expect their patients to take in their medical marijuana?
They want them to either vape, yes, vape it, or take it by mouth as a concentrated oil.
Vaping is short for vaporizing, or taking the marijuana leaf and heating up so all those marijuana compounds, the cannabinoids, terpenes, turn into a vapor and can be breathed in. The vaporizer never gets hot enough to burn the marijuana. It just dries out all the oils, and those oils are heated out of the marijuana leaf. Because it doesn't burn, there are no products of combustion, so no tars and carcinogens that you get with smoking.
Speaking about vaporizing versus smoking, there's this urban myth that marijuana smoked through a bong is not as bad as smoking a joint.
A bong is essentially a big glass, water-filled pipe for smoking marijuana. The marijuana is packed into the pipe end, water is poured into the bowl, and the marijuana is lighted. The user breathes in the smoke from the burning marijuana through the water.
Is it somehow safer? No way. The smoke may be cooled, but it's still smoke, and the products of combustion are still there. Even with the bong, you get the same carcinogens and tars found in cigarette smoke.
Now, marijuana, like anything in life, can be used for both good and bad. It's not the devil's lettuce, killing innocent youths around the globe and around the clock, but neither is it a drug that can be used regularly and not cause some harms to some people.
We still don't know a lot about marijuana and its effects on teenagers. Maybe it isn't as bad as the studies show, but maybe it's worse. Hopefully, we will learn a lot more about this in the years to come. But do you really want to take that gamble by using it now? What do you think? Better safe than sorry?
I'm sure you're brimming with questions of your own now.
Unfortunately, seeing as we are separated by this screen, we can't answer you directly.
But what we can do is answer some of the common questions our schoolmates asked us when they found out we wanted to make a video about marijuana.
Isn't marijuana addictive?
Marijuana is as addictive as caffeine. Seriously, roughly 9% of coffee drinkers meet the criteria for being addicted. And the overall number of people who have ever tried marijuana who get addicted is estimated to be about 9%. But that doesn't tell the whole story. If you start to use any potentially addictive substance when you're young and your brain is still developing, the risk of addiction goes way up. That goes for coffee, cigarettes, alcohol, and yes, marijuana. Start marijuana at age 13 and you have about a 20% chance of developing a full-blown addiction. Start after 21 and it drops to below 3%. So overall, the risk of addiction may be 9% for all new users, but the early users are at a much higher risk.
What is heavy use of marijuana?
Great question. There's no fixed definition of heavy use, but some studies define heavy use as 50 exposures per year, while others call it 3 to 4 exposures per week.
Is there more than one type of marijuana plant?
As was discussed earlier, hemp and marijuana come from essentially the same plant. They belong to a genus called cannabis. There are 3 types of cannabis: cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, and cannabis ruderalis. There's no one marijuana plant, and sativa and indica strains have been crossbred so many times that they are now very hard to tell apart.
Can I grow my own marijuana?
Yes! As of August this year, the law changed and people are allowed to grow their own, but only if they have a prescription from a doctor or nurse practitioner to use medical marijuana, and they apply and are granted permission to grow it for themselves and to grow it for up to one other person with a prescription. Now, if you get permission to grow marijuana in your backyard or in a closet somewhere, you'll still have to be inspected and will have to meet high standards, though probably not as high as the licensed producers who are heavily regulated and regularly inspected by government inspectors. Licensed producers undergo intense scrutinization by the government to make sure their marijuana is of the highest standard and is very safe to use.
Why don't people just buy it off the street?
Buying marijuana from the guy down the road is not legal. Even if they have a license to grow it, they can't sell it to anyone. And the guy with the unregulated grow-up may not be growing safe weed. The marijuana he's selling has not been through any quality checks or inspections and may well be full of fungus or covered in herbicides, fungicides, or pesticides. So it's only legal if you get a marijuana prescription from a doctor. And it's only legal to grow your own if you get permission and have been inspected. And the safest and most reliable supply will still be from the officially sanctioned licensed producers.
Is it worse to drive drunk or drive stoned?
That is an excellent question. Whose studies reported by the National Highway Safety Administration's in its Traffic Safety Facts Research Note, February 2015, clearly show that driving under the influence of alcohol is far worse than driving after using marijuana. That doesn't mean driving stoned is completely safe. Lots of closed course driving studies have shown that marijuana slows your reflexes, makes you inattentive, and results in poor judgment calls. Best way to arrive safely is to grind clean and sober.
Why is the government making it legal?
Well, actually, the liberal government of Jean Chrétien made medical marijuana legal in 2001. The current liberal government under Justin Trudeau plans to make recreational marijuana legal by the end of 2017. Their website says they want to, quote, legalize, regulate, and restrict access to marijuana.
Our hope is that they include education on the safe use of marijuana as part of their platform. Our society has hundreds of years of experience dealing with alcohol, and we're pretty good at managing it. Okay, there are still lots of people with alcohol issues, but overall, our society has developed pretty good structures for using alcohol appropriately and dealing with the fallout when its use becomes destructive.
Canadians will need a lot of education about marijuana, starting with you guys, so that it can be integrated into our society safely and constructively.
In this video, we've tried to highlight some of the background of marijuana, where it can be used safely, and where its use can be problematic. We've also tried to answer some of the questions we've been asked by kids in our school.
Other questions we got asked, but just didn't have time to answer included. What if I only use it once?
What happens if you snort it?
Can you eat marijuana as a salad?
If someone's smoking in the car beside me, will I get high?
Can you inject marijuana?
What wine can I pair with marijuana?
And the most important question of all, did Harambe use weed?
Clearly, we have our work cut out for us.
Thank you for watching this video.
Be safe and have a great school year.